Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Luke Chandler, and I am a gym enthusiast, recreational lifter myself, and human performance enthusiast, personally. I don't do anything professionally. I am just an enthusiast for myself, and since I was around 14 and started lifting, have been obsessed with it ever since. And of course, in my time as a teenager lifting, I was just your average gym bro, loved going to the gym and lifting heavy and lifting hard. And then as that progressed, as I got older, it progressed more into sports and performance optimization and stuff like this, stuff that you might hear as, science-based kind of thing. Although I definitely want to make it clear off the bat on this video to distance myself from kind of the mainstream science-based stuff that you hear about, because what I'm going over in this video is some of the stuff relating to that kind of sphere in the lower level lifter kind of population that you see, and the sort of science-based crowd that populates among the lower lifters, or the lower levels of recreational and competitive lifting. Today, of course, we all know the science-based craze is the huge thing right now. You got guys like Jeff Nipper, just to drop a name. I'm not going to make any comment on what he says or make any critique of any specific thing that he says, because I don't really know, and I also don't really care. But a lot of the hypertrophy stuff that you see around, he's a big guy that talks about this hypertrophy stuff. He's always talking about the 6-week and the 12-week hypertrophy studies, and stuff like this, talking about hypertrophy, right? And that is the topic of today's video. But a lot of the stuff that you hear them talking about, it's not really clarified to the viewer what exactly is going on in those studies and what actually is muscle growth. And that's what we're going to be going over. So look at this chart I have here. As you can see, there's quite a few things written on it. But I don't want you to get lost in the details here. This might be a little bit of a longer presentation, but I hope to be as comprehensive as I'm capable of presenting. And hopefully, if you're new to this sort of stuff, or you've never heard anything like this, hopefully it will expand your knowledge base quite a bit on kind of what's going on when you go to the gym, how muscle growth actually occurs, and some things that we can use to optimize that and specify and specialize exactly what we're trying to get when we go to the gym, to optimize your training for you, to get your best results for exactly what you're trying to get. So the first thing that we have to get right at the top here is there are two main types of hypertrophy. Now, it's one thing I should get out of the way with this whole presentation is that this stuff is very complicated. If you've ever read anything about like science or anything, or you remember back to your high school biology class or something, you'll remember that this stuff is very complicated and there's a lot of words that maybe don't make much sense. You hear endothelial and somatic and epiphyseal, this and that. And a lot of those might not make sense. My goal is to help explain that in a way that makes sense. But just know that a lot of these things are extremely complicated. And when I say there's two types of hypertrophy, even that is not quite correct, because there are a lot of things we don't know about and a lot of things going around in the background. But as a general matter of a principle, to start this discussion off, there are two types of hypertrophy, okay? That is sarcoplasmic and myofibril. Now, let me also circle back to when I was talking about this hypertrophy stuff that you hear around the internet and around science-based crowds and stuff like this. Hypertrophy in a definitional manner just means that something is getting bigger, okay? So if you take a balloon and you fill it with water or you fill it with air, that balloon is technically hypertrophying, okay? It's getting bigger. That's all that word means, okay? That's gonna be very important, and hopefully I'll be able to illuminate why that is so important to you. So sarcoplasmic and myofibril, both of those would be called hypertrophy, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and myofibril hypertrophy. Now, we have some key characteristics under each of them. Myofibril hypertrophy is protein. That is protein that's making up your muscle. So when you think about your muscle, right, and you think about going to the gym and you think about getting your muscle bigger, I'm gonna assume you're probably thinking about getting more protein. You're thinking about making the bicep bigger and filling it up with more protein, right? That's always what I thought about. When I was a kid going to the gym, I wanted real muscle, right? That's myofibril hypertrophy. Now, contrasting that with the other type of hypertrophy that we have, sarcoplasmic, it is glycogen and water. That is what sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is. Now, I gotta break down a little bit about muscle anatomy and how it is structured. Okay, so your muscle. Let's take the bicep for example. Right, you know that it's one muscle, right? Well, the muscle is made up of fibers that are made up of even smaller fibers, and those smallest fibers are called myofibrils. Okay, and those myofibrils are made up of even smaller little subunits, they're called sarcomeres, and doesn't really have any reference to sarcoplasmic, so don't get those confused. Myofibrils are made up of sarcomeres, and these myofibrils are made up of repeating sarcomeres, okay? And these sarcomeres are the tiny little motors that make up the fibers, that make up your muscle. And those sarcomeres are the actual motor of contraction. They are what allow you to contract. It's what makes your muscles work, okay? And it's very complicated how it works. You have different calcium ion channels, and you have, ATP conversion and creatine and a million different things that go into how that works. If you want to learn more about specifically how that works, look up the sliding filament theory. Now note that it is a theory because we don't actually know exactly all the details of how it works. But that is myofibrils. Sarcoplasmic. So you have the myofibrils that are within the fibers, that are within the muscle, right? But in between those myofibrils, okay, is what's called the sarcoplasm, okay? And basically, if you remember back to like high school biology, you remember cells are made up of what's called a cytoplasm. And what that is basically just a fluid within the cell that is that houses, all the different things in the cell that do things, right? Like you remember the mitochondria and stuff. And the sarcoplasm of a muscle is just what that is called in a muscle cell, okay? And what it is made up of mainly is glycogen and water. Now, again, like I said, nothing here is quite straightforward. It's made up of a lot of other things, but the main constituent is glycogen, which if you don't know, glycogen is carbohydrates, and water, okay? Now, if you're hearing that and you're saying, Luke, why is this important? Well, let me explain why. So when you are going to the gym and working out, let me make sure I was still recording. When you are going to the gym and working out, you are trying to get hypertrophy, right? But as we just discussed, there's two different types of hypertrophy. So let me ask you, when you're going to the gym, whatever you're doing 5 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 5, or you're doing 10 by 10, or you're doing lengthened partials, or whatever you're doing, which one of these are you getting? Do you know? Well, I can help you with that. Sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, it is known that high volume training gives you sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And it is also known that low repetition work relative to higher volume gives you more myofibril growth. And as we discussed again, myofibril growth is real protein. That is more sarcomeres that make up your muscle. Those are the little motors that do the contraction, right? So that is a known fact in science, and is also bared out quite evidently in the real world, right? You look at a bodybuilder and he kind of looks like he's a little bit puffed up, right? He looks like almost like his muscles aren't even real, right? You're looking at him and you're like, holy, that doesn't even look real. Well, that is because they're kind of not. If you look at it, any bodybuilder, he is eating a bunch of carbohydrates, right? And doing a bunch of high volume. Well, what is he getting then? He's getting sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. That's why bodybuilders and stuff, when they go to compete, they are always talking about carb loading. And I got to cut my carbs back, and then I got to cut my water, and then I got to take diuretics, and then I got to eat a bunch of carbs right before I go on stage. That is because they are trying to load as much carbohydrates and water into the muscle as they can to make them look as big as they can when they're on stage, right? So obviously it makes sense as a bodybuilder because you're trying to look as big as possible. But just because you're the biggest doesn't mean per se that you have the most real muscle. And I say real muscle because it is, right? It's real muscle, and sarcoplasmic is not real muscle. Now, I'm not here trying to say that every bodybuilder doesn't have any real muscle or something. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, of course, bodybuilders have real muscle, and anyone that goes to the gym and trains hard as hell is gonna have real muscle. But when you look at, say, the difference between a strongman athlete and your run-of-the-mill, locally competing or even IFBB level pro bodybuilder, the distribution of sarcoplasmic to myofibril hypertrophy is going to be very different, okay? And we all know that strongmen are a lot stronger than bodybuilders on average, right? Well, that is a product of their training. They're training differently. You look at a strongman guy, and he's going to be performing probably lower reps on average, or at least lower volume as a whole than your bodybuilder. And your bodybuilder is going to be doing lighter weights on average and more volume. That is a direct product of the fact that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is overseen by nutrient storage, okay? And again, this is another spot where if you really want to learn about it, you can go research, but it is extremely complicated. And a lot of different molecules and signaling things that your body makes oversee this nutrient storage. Mainly of note would be insulin, right? We've all heard of insulin. We know that diabetics need to use insulin. Well, that is because their body, for whatever reason, whether it be a hereditary disease or whether it be an environmentally induced disease, for whatever reason it is, they are incapable of producing insulin enough to store carbohydrates that they are eating in their diet. So bodybuilders and stuff, they take insulin so they can store more glycogen, which is carbohydrates, in the muscle, giving them more sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Another thing is inflammation. I'm sure there's a lot more things, but these are the main things that oversee your sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. It is going to be how many carbohydrates you're eating in your diet and how much volume you're doing in your training. And that's going to be, you go to the gym and you do a bunch of volume, and that creates a need for your body to store more energy in the form of glycogen in the muscle. Insulin, as we just said, is one of the main regulatory mechanisms that oversees that storage. And insulin also stores body fat. Same molecule does the same thing. Glycogen stored in the sarcoplasm of your muscle is the same thing as fat that is stored in your stomach or all throughout your body, right? It is used as a form of energy. your body fat is a long-term store of energy, where glycogen is a more short-term, because your body knows that every other day you go into the gym and you do 57 sets of 20 reps with a really light weight, and it knows, hey, I'm gonna need to have a bunch of energy on hand to do all this endurance work, right? So your body adapts just like anything else. We know that your body is a very adaptive mechanism, and indeed it is, and it is going to store glycogen for that purpose. So that is sarcoplasmic hypertrophy in a nutshell. There's 1,000,001 more details and still more that I'm learning about it. Like I said, we don't know all the details. No one does, because the things that happen within your body are very complex and also hard to study, right? Now, I should mention that in recent years, these science-based lifters and stuff, they have come up with a theory that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is kind of a preparatory form of myofibril growth, meaning that the theory is that as you go to the gym and work out, this sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is basically your body getting nutrients into the muscle to prepare it to later make myofibril hypertrophy. And that is a novel theory because within the sarcoplasm, as I mentioned, there are other things other than glycogen and water. There's different sorts of protein and stuff that do some things we know what they do, other things we're not quite sure. So the idea that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy could lead to more myofibril growth, it's a novel idea. There is zero evidence for this, but it is a novel idea. I would like to mention one study that was done that actually displayed the fact that I believe it was like 12 weeks, and I believe they were trained lifters. Actually, I believe they were extensively trained lifters. I believe it was like 7+ years of training. Do not quote me on that. But this was one study where I found them talking about this particular subject on. And what they found was that this 12-week super high volume training study that they did, at the end of the study, at the beginning of the study and at the end of the study, they did basically muscle biopsies of these subjects, and they found that this super high volume training, they actually lost myofibril growth. They relative to myofibril, they gained more sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, but they also lost a small amount of myofibril hypertrophy. That's a true fact. Whether that was just one study and it doesn't actually bear out if it were to be done again, or maybe there was some confounding factors, or who knows, right? There's just not enough research on it. But that is of note, and that definitely goes against this sarcoplasmic expansion theory of hypertrophy. Another thing of note on this sarcoplasmic before I move on is that the one thing giving credence to this theory here is the fact that bulking does work, right? We all know that if you give a kid, if you tell a kid to go eat a bunch of food and then go train, he will gain a lot of muscle. Are you going to tell that kid to go do a bunch of volume, or are you going to tell him to go do lower reps? Well, I would tell him to go heavier and stay around the 3 to 8 rep range, which in scientific studies bears more myofibril growth than sarcoplasmic growth. And it's what I did as a kid, and it worked incredibly well for me. But bulking does work. Now, is that a product of the carbs that you're eating building you more muscle? Or is it a product of the fact that you're eating more overall, more protein and training harder because you have more energy? Who knows? Although I would speculate that it's the latter. But nothing beats that. Let's move on to myofibril hypertrophy. So as we said, it is real protein. It's increasing the size of those fibers and the number or the number of myofibrils. A lot of details here. Short answer is we don't know exactly how that works, or if you can get new muscle fibers, or if those fibers just get bigger. No one knows. What we do know is that myofibril hypertrophy, you get more protein in the muscle. You get more contractile units. As I said, your muscle's made up of tons and tons of these tiny sarcomeres that are tiny little motors that cause it to contract. And myofibril hypertrophy is more protein. If you want to get into some kind of deep stuff about this, look up myofibril packing and myofibril splitting. Very interesting stuff on that. But here's some key notes about myofibril hypertrophy. It is real protein accretion. Accretion is just the expression of more protein. So it's putting more protein in the muscle, okay? How is that done? How is that done? Well, as you can see here at the very top, I have something written here. You probably can't read it, but it says DNA coding for protein, okay? So within your myofibrils, within your muscles, there are what are called nuclei. And these nuclei, if you remember back to your high school biology, nuclei are what have your DNA in them. And your DNA is, of course, all your genes and stuff, right? And your genes are what you make. And these genes are what are called expressed by your body making RNA from this DNA. You remember that RNA, ribonucleic acid, and that RNA leaves the nucleus of whatever cell it's in that has your DNA in it, and that RNA goes to wherever in the body that it's supposed to go, and then it makes proteins, right? And it could be protein in the form of new muscle. It could be protein in the form of these tiny little enzymes, and peptides in your body that go around and do different things, and do everything for your body. That is what your DNA does. And these nuclei that are in your muscle are the nucleuses for your muscles. They are the DNA for your muscle. So your nuclei are what make new muscle for you, new myofibril protein. And these nuclei are what have the DNA for your muscles in them, right? So they are what oversee you making more muscle. Now, there are some things that you need to know about these nuclei, and that is that your muscle cells are what are called multinucleated. So that means that each cell has multiple nuclei in them. And that is important because it is known that your nuclei only oversee a certain what's called domain of your muscle cells. So you have your muscle cell, right? And it's made up of many different myofibrils. Where's my thing? Now, as we said, the muscle cells that have these nuclei in them are made up of many different myofibrils. And your nuclei, as we said again, only oversee a certain domain, right? And what that means is these little nuclei that have DNA in them that make new protein for that cell, they can only make protein for that new cell in a certain area of it, right? So if the cell gets big enough, if your muscle cell gets big enough, they cannot make new protein for the far side of that cell. So they get new nuclei. And that is why your cells, as I said, are multinucleated, because of course the cells themselves can get bigger. You can get more myofibrils in them, and it can get so big that one nuclei can't keep making the cell any bigger. So it has to get a new nuclei. Well, how it gets that is kind of the problem and a little bit complicated. But first, I should mention one thing, and that is that the domain that we said, right? Well, it's not fixed, okay? So it can change. So that domain for your nuclei can get bigger and can get smaller. How it does that, we don't really know. And how you can cause it to do that, we don't know either. But we do know that it's pretty hard, and we also know that as you get older, it gets harder and harder to do. When you're younger, they seem to be more flexible. And the idea is that they are more flexible because, as we know, when you're younger, you have to adapt to new things, right? So if you have only one nuclei in your muscle cell, the domain of it can get bigger, so that you can get the muscle cell bigger very quickly to be able to later fill in with new nuclei to make that muscle more permanent. That is the idea, and that seems to be what kind of bears out in reality. But if you are not young, as it were, how you can change that domain, seemingly no one's ever really been able to demonstrate it being done. And all the muscle biopsies and stuff that have been done on trained lifters, on untrained lifters, on elite lifters, it seems that when you kind of grow up, it's not flexible anymore. And that domain is fixed. And therefore, if you want to get bigger muscles, you need a donation of nuclei. And that is done through what is called a satellite cell. Now, your satellite cell is a stem cell for your muscle. It has to be activated to give the nucleus that it has within it to that specific muscle fiber to support further myofibril growth. Now, these satellite cells are very intrinsic to you particularly. And as you age, the what's termed pool of satellite cells that you have, which is the combined amount that you have within your body, goes down. And why exactly? Well, don't really know. Is it a product of age itself, or is it a product of inflammation and stuff that you gather over your lifetime? Well, it's probably both, right? Because as you age, you can't avoid inflammation, right? Everyone has to wake up and work and do all sorts of stuff. And also, food and stuff in our environment, it can be inflammatory to the body and can also cause damage to this satellite cell pool. But how this works is that as you age, as a consequence of aging itself or damage and inflammation and oxidation throughout your lifetime, causes these satellite cells to what's called differentiate more than they proliferate. What that means simplistically is that these satellite cells, you have an intrinsic amount in your body. They have to, of course, as we said, donate new nuclei to your muscle cells to be able to make you build more muscle, but that's not their only job. They do other things as well. And in fact, there's other types of cells in your muscles, and these satellite cells are specific to muscle, right? They really only do stuff for the muscle. These stem cells as a whole, they're very specific to different parts of your body. And as we said, these are muscle stem cells, but they have other jobs as well than just giving you nuclei to make more muscle. They have other jobs, and damage, again, that you cause over your lifetime can put strain on the pool and make them turn into different cells to repair damage and stuff like this more than they replicate themselves. So they can differentiate, meaning that satellite cell can turn into a different cell and then lose its ability to do everything else. Once it differentiates, it can only go do that one thing that it's doing now. But if it proliferates, it splits itself, right? And makes two of itself. And then it goes on and turns into that cell that it needs to happen. But, and then it leaves behind, right, itself. So it self-renews. So if you were to only proliferate and never differentiate, that pool of satellite cells would never go away and it would stay the same. And hypothetically, you would stay, able to build the same amount of muscle throughout your whole lifetime. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but with respect to your satellite cell and the fact that you have to activate these satellite cells to get nuclei, that is a fact. There's other things that can build muscle in different ways. Like I said, things have never exactly been proven, but we're going to get into that. But, okay, so inflammation, as we discussed. Inflammation and damage over the lifetime can cause you to lose these satellite cells and have less of them. And also, it can cause them to lose what's called their efficiency, is the best way to describe it. Basically, you lose the amount of them, so you have less of them over time as a consequence of lifestyle factors and age in itself. But even with the ones that you still have, they kind of get a little bit lazy and they kind of just don't work as good anymore. Mainly because they're just kind of harder to activate, right? They don't want to wake up, they don't want to work, they kind of just want to stay the same, right? Which is a problem, and I'm going to give you some information that might help you keep these satellite cells over time and kind of stave off a main hallmark of aging, which is this loss of satellite and stem cells. That is a main hallmark of aging itself. And that is, I have it written here, over time, as a consequence of repeated and overextended bouts of extreme exercise and causing damage to your body, can locally place more stress on the satellite cell pool, creating more pressure for them to differentiate rather than proliferate. As we said, but a key thing there that I want you to take out of this is that if you locally place more strain on the satellite cell pool. Now, what that means is it has been shown that creating large demands of the pool of satellite cells at any given time makes these cells differentiate more than they proliferate, which makes sense, right? If you break your leg or something, those couple weeks that your leg is broken, there's extreme demands on your immune system and all these satellite cells and stuff to heal it up, right? Because it doesn't want you to have a broken leg. You might die. You can't go out and get food. What if a bear comes? Whatever, right? It needs to heal that up. And so it places more strain, the more damage that you put on it locally, and that is what causes over time your cells to differentiate more than they proliferate. So the practical advice to this would be, if you are more interested in your longevity, in your long-term outcome and your long-term health, as well as your absolute potential in the gym in terms of performance and etc., you would want to take a more, well, long-term approach to this sort of stuff. And instead of, being the, I'll just reminisce about myself. Sorry, I had to make sure I'm still recording. Being a 15, 16-year-old kid and going into the gym and just trying to destroy yourself in the gym. Well, I think that's awesome. I think that's absolutely awesome. However, as you get a little bit older and as you start to kind of approach the point where it's really starting to get hard to make gains, and anyone who's a more experienced lifter will be able to tell you, you will reach a point in your exercise and lifting that you can really kind of hurt yourself. Now, you new lifters out there, I don't want you to listen to this at all because you need to be going as hard as you can. But you can, of course, do too much damage to your muscles to where you can actually decrease in performance, right? Everyone knows you can go and you could do 10 sets of 10 on squat, freaking hard as crap, puke everywhere, start bleeding from your nose, and then not be able to recover from that and actually be weaker after all that. Because, let's say maybe you can't eat enough protein or you can't eat enough nutrition to support that, or your body's just not capable of healing it. You can do too much in any given session. So the practical approach would be to not annihilate, but stimulate, right? That's old school wisdom, right? And the scientific basis of that is that over time, even if you do make progress from doing that, let's say you're just a freak and your diet is absolutely on point, you're eating all kinds of meat and all sorts of stuff and getting all sorts of vitamins and minerals from the meat and stuff and all the protein, you will still lose these satellite cells in the pool over time as a consequence of the localized demand for them. Again, causing them to differentiate more than they proliferate. Now, so we understand all that, and you have that practical advice there. Your nuclei, right? So, as we said, what they do is they code for new protein to be put into the muscle to make the muscle bigger and stronger, right? And they do this by giving you a higher coding speed, and it's coding for protein, right? It's making protein, as well as a higher potential to create new protein. So you have the cell and you have the nucleus, and then you're working out super hard, you're going heavy as hell, and you're going crazy, and then you build your muscles up to the point that these cells are really big, right? Well, now it's to the point that your muscle cell is bigger than the domain of your nuclei. So now you need the satellite cell to donate a nuclei to fill that domain that the one nuclei can't fill anymore to support further muscle growth. So now you have an extra nuclei, and because you have that extra nuclei, hypothetically, again, as long as you have all the nutrition in place to support it, you will be able to synthesize more protein at any given time, right? Because you have more nuclei with DNA in them that are ready to code for more protein. Again, assuming you have the nutrition in place, but also because you have this new nuclei, because new nuclei are permanent, you now have a higher potential to make new muscle. Now, whether you fulfill that potential or not, well, that's up to you, and that's up to how big your balls are and how many adaptations you want to get. But yeah, new nuclei are permanent, so they never go away. Of course, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, that will go away if you stop eating carbohydrates, stop drinking water, or stop doing super high volume. And they will go away very quickly, actually. There's studies on it. Sarcoplasmic fades away just as quick as you stop eating carbs. Myofibril growth, it stays there a lot longer and potentially forever if you have the right nutrition to support it. Although if you stop working out completely and go away forever, it will probably fade away over time to a certain extent. Although, you know, people who worked out in their youth, usually you can tell that they look a little bit different. But that is probably because new nuclei that you get never go away. They never go away at all. They are permanent, seemingly. So that is the basis for what is termed muscle memory, right? It's bro science, right? Everyone here is like muscle memory, bro. Well, there's a scientific basis for it. It's real. And that is because the new nuclei never go away. And since you have those new nuclei, at any given time, if you want to go to the gym and do something damaging to your muscles and get an adaptation, as it's called, you will code for a new protein at a higher speed, as well as have the potential to make more protein than you would if you had less nuclei. One last thing that I will mention is on the topic of protein synthesis. So your nuclei are what synthesize this protein to make more myofibril growth, and your DNA is what oversees everything here. One thing that should be noted is that protein synthesis. You hear a lot of people and science-based people talk about, oh, how much protein can you use per meal and how much protein is really necessary and all this stuff. Well, let me fill you in on a little secret. The amount of protein that you can use per meal for various purposes, including making myofibril growth, as well as I hit a little bit on the fact that everything in your body basically is done with protein, with enzymes and peptides and stuff like this. And of course, satellite cells and these nuclei are made up of protein. No upper limit of protein synthetic abilities, meaning how much protein you can use to make new muscle, has ever been found. And in fact, there have been studies done on it that went up to 100 grams of protein in one meal. And in fact, those people who ate 100 grams of protein per meal after exercise did in fact show an elevated level of protein synthesis above that which was elicited with consecutively lower amounts of protein. And no study has ever been done above 100 grams. But speculatively, even if you eat even more, you're going to synthesize even more if you give your body a reason to donate nuclei and then use those nuclei to make new muscle. Well, how's that done? That is done through an adaptation. And since I'm giving practical advice now, super heavy weight done for as many reps as possible is how you do that. Or if you're not into that, maybe you could get away with doing a little bit lighter weight for even more reps. But the central basis of it is scientifically, as well as in every case I've ever heard of in the real world, and every coach or person who's ever gotten strong has ever told me, you have to do something that you have never done before. You have to go heavier than you've ever gone before. You have to do more reps than you've ever done before. And that is centrally how you do it. And of course, there's many different ways you can do that. If you're asking for specifics, I'm not going to give you that on this video. That would be too much information for free, right? But the way I can describe it is you have to do something you are unaccustomed to, or that you have never done before. Again, whatever that is, whether that's a new exercise that you've never done before that you go hard as frick on, or if it's an exercise that you've been doing forever that you also go hard as frick on. It doesn't really matter. Although one thing I will point out is that things that you are unaccustomed to doing or have never trained before seem to elicit more response than something that you have done before. If you want to look into what I'm talking about and make sure that I'm correct and I'm not making stuff up, look up the repeated bout effect. And also, if you just want to think, intuitively, what do you get more sore from? If you're used to going to the gym every week and doing the same workout, you're not getting sore from that anymore, are you? But if you go into the gym and you do something that you're not used to doing, even if you don't go super, super hard, you will be very sore the next day. That is because you're causing damage to the muscle, and that is how you use the nuclei to make new muscle, because you have to cause damage to it. And if you want me to get into that stuff, I might in another video. But that's pretty much all I got, man. Train hard as frick. That's pretty much it.